topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, I think anybody outside of Washington, D.C. looks at what happened on January the 6th and what's been going on with the J6 Patriots as being one big totalitarian move by this strong-armed government against Donald Trump and anybody that supports Donald Trump. It has been nonstop. And I would say that, on one hand, I think it's a positive because America is starting to wake up to just how vicious and how totalitarian and how aggressive against our U.S. Constitution that the current regime is. Now, we're going to talk about the Proud Boys, the J6 convictions, and the plot against Donald Trump. The FBI tried to convince the former leader of the Proud Boys, Enrique Tarrio, recently to lie about Donald Trump in order to advance their witch hunt on the former president using the January 6 prosecutions. Now, this isn't the first time. This has been a consistent play out of their playbook. Suzzanne Monk is with us. Washington, D.C. based author and activist says Tarrio revealed this bombshell information after recently receiving a 22-year sentence for the January 6 charges, despite not even being present in Washington, D.C. on January the 6th. Suzzanne Monk, welcome to the show. Good to have you with us.
Bill, thanks for having me. Appreciate you having me here.
It is really this bad. I know it's hard for people to understand, and they think, well, maybe they might have done something worthy of these kind of punishments, but clearly the judge has gone after the Proud Boys. I mean, what are we talking? Over 80 years combined between the 4 or 5 of them that have been convicted so far?
Yes, 10 years for Dominic Pizzola, 15 years for Zach Reel, 17 years for Joe Biggs, 18 years for Ethan Nordine, and of course, 22 years for Enrique Tarrio, who, as you said in your opening, was not even physically in D.C. on January 6th or January 5th, for that matter.
Well, you and I talked about this before, and especially with the Proud Boys, it smacks of what happened in Michigan, that they must have been infiltrated by some operative FBI agents who needed to get some extra money or maybe some extra credit so that they could move up the FBI ladder, so to speak, and, came up with this story because it's hard to believe that, the Proud Boys, knowing their background, that they would lead such a thing as being suggested. Well, not even being suggested. I mean, they're being convicted of it.
Correct. And I think it's even worse than that because they did have confidential human sources embedded in the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, all of these groups. None of these confidential human sources, as we've seen when they testify in court, none of them reported any plan to overthrow the government, to commit violence, to damage property, to storm the Capitol that day. They reported no plan. This theory, this idea that it was all the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and there was some major conspiracy with Donald Trump comes right from the top, right from the DOJ, right from the FBI. And in fact, they are even the ones who implanted the 1776 returns, which is what they accused Enrique Tarrio of making a plan. The plan they accused him of making, they fabricated it themselves. They lied to fellow Proud Boy Jeremy Bertino about that plan, said that Enrique Tarrio had written it. He had not even looked at it or even opened the document, even though they had a confidential human source send it to him to try to connect him with that. So this plot, this big, a massive Defense Department level entrapment. I mean, this is a military style coup against the American people to entrap patriots and really strong patriot groups like the Oath Keepers, like the Proud Boys, and like so many of the other patriots that got swept up in that dragnet that day.
Well, Suzzanne, you've been on top of this from day one and following the cases and everything, which has just been a service to the rest of the patriots on the outside, trying to understand exactly, what happened as best we can. But all things government, we know that they have their own narrative and their own story. So this 1776 supposed, dossier. Again, we hear a dossier associated with government authorities, and of course that immediately throws up a red flag. Where did that come from? Do we know?
Yeah, it was created by the FBI. It was presented by FBI agent Miller to Jeremy Bertino. It had been fed it through a female friend, a lady friend of Enrique. She had sent it to him. He had never actually even opened the file, but in court, we watched the government prosecution accuse Enrique of writing it. And then when they had to admit on the stand, in their own audio of their own interrogation of Jeremy Bertino, they had to admit on the stand that, in fact, they had no evidence that he had written it, and they came short of admitting they had written it themselves. Unfortunately, because what we're seeing with these cases is the judge is almost a sixth prosecutor in
Yes,
these
exactly.
situations. He is literally handing every single benefit to the prosecution, and the defense is compelled again and again to scramble. Their motions are rejected. Their objections are rejected.
Right.
The first, the fourth, the Sixth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, all of these motions that they file of all of these violations going on, and they do not allow them to call exculpatory witnesses. In fact, we're just hearing now about Ray Epps being
Yes.
gone after by the FBI for one single little charge. Ray Epps is actually in the video that was used to convict my friends, the Proud Boys, over and over and over again at every single one of these breach sites. And yet the defense was not allowed to call him and subpoena him even as a witness.
You see, and there's even video of Ray Epps. He was inciting the crowd. They even have him making a phone call, I think, to a relative saying that, all hell was breaking loose. And he was all animated about, what was happening there at Ground Zero, right?
Right. Yes, very much so. And when you sit in the courtroom for, 2, 3 months watching footage after footage, in fact, there was a period of time this spring that I had seen the face of Ray Epps more than I'd seen the face of my husband, because we see him so frequently. But there are so many operatives in this J6 footage that start to be revealed. When you look at it as a whole picture, you can see the massive operation. It's not a few federal agents. It is perhaps 1,000 or more operatives between radical leftists, federal agents, undercover officers, and even Ukrainian nationals here
Yes.
in the crowd participating as Trump supporters, dressed up as Trump supporters, creating that riot. It was not patriots who went there that day to protest the election and to stand for the challenge of the certification of the electors, as we all expected to happen. It was a massive infiltrated operation to create a false flag insurrection and blame it on patriots and on Donald Trump.
Yeah, like this has never happened before, led by the CIA and other operatives with other countries, right?
Yes, it's a color revolution right here in the United States, just like we saw in the Maidan Plaza, just like we saw in Ukraine. We've seen in Georgia, South Ossetia. We've seen all across the globe. Actually, we
Exactly.
seem to be involved in toppling governments and putting in place puppet governments that we control. And we've seen that exact thing happen right here with Donald Trump, who did win the 2020 election and certainly had the right to go through the legal process and have the electors challenged, as we know constitutionally is allowed. But
Exactly.
instead, they installed a puppet government under Joe Biden.
Well, Stacey Abrams didn't see any jail time or get indicted or, led down the road to some sort of personal
Right.
bankruptcy, for her statements that she made. But yet, here it is. We live in this world of a double standard. Suzzanne Monk, I don't know how you could sit in the courtroom every day. I think I'd be thrown out. Because after a while, you're seeing time and again how evidence is being abused, how the the defendants are being mistreated by the court, by a biased court, obviously biased. I don't know how you sit there. I mean, I'd be biting holes through my tongue.
I do admit to having a little bit of post-traumatic court disorder because of the experience. It is painful to watch your friend the Constitution be basically thrown into the trash, and to see how big that problem is. I don't know how many times I had to read in an article that Judge Timothy Kelly, the judge in the Proud Boys trial, was Trump appointed, Trump appointed, Trump
Yes.
appointed. It was almost a slap in the face every single time, because we've got to not only vet these judges, just like we do our elected officials, but we have to keep on top of them. And it is deep. All of the January 6th judges need to recuse themselves. And frankly, you mentioned the Michigan case, Bill. That was actually an excellent example, because as we saw the acquittals in that case, when you are tried by a jury of your peers,
Exactly.
reality, truth, and logic, it prevails. But as we have seen here in DC, with a 97-98% conviction rate of these J6 cases, this jury is actually a jury made up of plaintiffs. The city of Washington, DC is a plaintiff in these cases, and the entire jury pool comes from Washington, DC. So imagine being tried by a jury of plaintiffs, of people who are accusing you. And
there's no jury of your peers. How do peers exist in that kind of environment?
Yeah. And these judges then play right into that. And the level of lack of knowledge is a big problem, on top of the bias. So in the sentencing just a week or so ago, in fact, we had Judge Kelly had to correct Ethan Nordean's sentencing because of the way he had calculated the guidelines. He didn't even understand how to apply the terrorism enhancement that they applied, merely because I don't have my water bottle with me, because somebody threw a water bottle. That was the big amount of violence that they used to call these guys terrorists and accuse them of committing violence that day. He didn't even know how to apply that enhancement appropriately, had to go and check his law book. So, the federal government, the Department of Justice, is shoving these cases through the court at an epic rate. There are dozens and dozens of cases, several cases any given day. I call it, the buffet of tyranny when you go down there, because there has been so many cases. The court system is overwhelmed. These judges are overwhelmed. And yet again, we see the bias play into effect over and over and over. And I think they're weary of it, but they're also, I've watched them lecture people on their political opinions from the bench.
Unbelievable.
In the middle of sentencing. So
like that's what they're supposed to do. Suzzanne Monk, Washington, D.C. based author and activist and podcaster as well. Suzzanne, I tell you, this is so disturbing every time we deal with this topic, to understand that these are fellow citizens. I mean, probably of the, how many? We have a little over 200 still that are incarcerated right now in DC. Is that correct?
Yeah, not just DC, that's across the country. And that number keeps growing. 2 weeks ago it was 185. 4 weeks ago it was 150. The arrests continue to come in. Many of these cases that have been ongoing, several of the people, hundreds of the people who were charged, were arrested back in 21, have been awaiting trial in jail, have been incarcerated pre-trial. But of course, there are those who were allowed to wait for their trial at home, as normally we should, because you're innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. And now we see those cases getting also these very high conviction rates, and individuals having to surrender. So that number will continue to go up, considering that the FBI has another 1,000 arrests on the books and are threatening another 3,000. The rumor is another 3,000 or more that they're actually looking to arrest.
My God, that many?
Yeah.
That's incredible. And here it is. We still don't have all the exculpatory evidence, as you mentioned, all the video footage. We were told originally, remember, 14,000 hours. And then we find out after Tucker Carlson got his hands on it, thank you very much, Leader McCarthy, some 44,000 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's unfortunate about the Kevin McCarthy's promise with regard to the 44,000 is a lot of those hours are hallways, they're not relevant areas. And when it is given when the families or the defendants are able to actually get access to that, it's in a huge dump. It's not organized in any way. The only way you can actually organize it is to use the Congress's own computers so they can search
Exactly.
areas. What we
Right.
really need is the body cam footage, and some of that has been released through discovery in some of the cases. I want to give credit to a J6er, Eric Clark, who has been sharing a lot of that. You can find him on Twitter, on X, excuse me, as J6 Anon. Please go and look at his footage, because he has been, as a defendant, he's defending himself. He has been taking the footage he has received in discovery and is sharing that. And that body cam footage has audio, and it reveals far, far more than what we will get out of the Capitol footage. I appreciate that there's some evidence, and the American people need to have the right to see what goes on in their Capitol. But as far as a promise from Kevin McCarthy or from Congress, what we need is for them to engage the process. We need for them to legislatively move these cases out of DC. We need them to bring these judges in front of the Judiciary Committee and really begin an investigation as to their bias, and begin the impeachment process on some of these judges. They do not deserve
Exactly.
to stay on the bench. We need them to do work. So that's where I'm at on the footage.
Well, I'm with you on that, Suzzanne. I'm also upset that the J6 committee managed to somehow do a Hillary Clinton on all the evidence. They were warned with the Republican House coming into play. Well, they were more than warned. They were told, keep all the evidence. We want to have it, when we meet. And the chair of the J6 committee, bleach bit, did a Hillary Clinton and got rid of all the evidence. I mean, how can they do that?
Yes, that's a great question. The action itself is illegal because, as we know, there's a Congressional Records Act that does require Congress keep records of what they are doing. But I think they had to cover up what was actually a crime in operation. As I always say, the attack on the American people with regards to J6 started on January 6, 2021, but it is ongoing to this day.
I say it actually started back in November,
yeah.
Suzzanne.
Yeah.
That's the thing. See, that's the root of all this. They keep ignoring that.
Right.
It was causal to January 6th. And
Correct.
you don't want to look back in November as to what's going on, even though you've got a majority of Americans, well over 60%, close to 70%, saying that, the election was fixed in one form or another.
Well, and that's what the J6 committee evidence would actually provide the American people knowledge of, is that not only did they use not only was the election fixed and we saw the result of January 6th, the select committee used this issue to affect the 2022 midterm elections. They fixed those elections. They went after candidates. They went after people in office. They went after Marjorie Taylor Greene, as we saw, using this weaponized select committee. It was election interference. It continues to be election interference. This entire January 6th issue is a way to say to the American people, sit down, shut up, we own your elections.
Exactly. We own your life, actually. And the thing is that in order to clean this up, Suzzanne, how are we? This isn't going to happen in just one election cycle. I mean, we're talking major cleanup throughout the entirety of government.
Yeah. The American people have a lot of work to do with regards to this. But as I always say, as an activist, it's important to understand that you don't get anywhere if you don't keep making those first steps. And the first step over and over and over eventually becomes the last step. So we need to get involved with our primary elections this year more than ever. This is a perfect time to engage and make sure that your Congress member is someone who is going to actually fight for the Constitution, someone who's going to uphold the rule of law, and somebody who has the cojones, if you will, to actually engage and do real work. We've got a lot of bench warmers sitting up there in Congress that do absolutely nothing, and they're almost more of a danger than the Democrats. We can see what people like Jamie Raskin and Nancy Pelosi do. We see their work is right there on their sleeve. But when you have some of the do nothing Republicans we see up there, it's almost worse, because we think we have a safe seat. We think that seat belongs to us, and actually again and again we're let down. So it's a perfect time to not only get involved and try to put the right person on the primary ballot, but as you
Exactly.
know, when you engage
Mhm.
with elected officials, especially incumbents, your engagement does shape how they are going to approach the next Congress, and in fact, how they are going to approach the next year of this Congress right now. So this is why I've created something called the Justice for J6 Candidates Pledge. We are asking Congress members and presidential candidates to pledge to getting justice for these defendants, to pledge to addressing the egregious conditions in our Bureau of Prisons, and to pledge to actually de-weaponizing the Department of Justice, the FBI. We need to come in not with a pair of snippers, but with with a bulldozer.
It's got to be a
with a
wrecking ball. It
lawnmower
really does.
to
You're
cut
right.
back
I
some of
agree.
this
Yeah.
dead weight. Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi was so aghast over the weekend when she was asked about her lack of participation on January the 6th, because we keep coming back to that. Clearly Donald Trump authorized her, to bring on the National Guard. Her Muriel Bowser rejected. These are the people at the top who were in control of the safety and of the Capitol building. It's their responsibility. The buck stops with them, and they failed at executing their rightful position, and they kind of let this play out. And it's so suspicious that Nancy Pelosi, and I believe this was a trap that was set up, and she knew this, so much so that she had her own daughter with a camera there on the premises. What, just by happenstance? Are you kidding me?
Isn't that convenient? And I like to remind everybody that when it comes to Congress, there is the House and there is the Senate, and the leader of both of those bodies are the ones responsible for all of the actions there at the Capitol, and of course the actions of Capitol Police. So we cannot let Mitch McConnell off the hook. He was just as aware what was going to happen that day, and just as relevant in that process. And to think anything else is, I think, just inaccurate. But Muriel Bowser is basically the lapdog of Nancy Pelosi, and she took her orders directly from the Democrats in Congress, as she always does. She turned down the National Guard. January 6th was first and foremost a failure by the government to secure the building, whether they were securing it from patriots, which we weren't really in the danger, or they were securing it from federal operatives, Antifa, radical leftists from the Ukraine, all kinds of,
Exactly.
ne'er-do-wells.
Right.
The security of the building was on them. And we have seen video after video of them standing down, of them removing the barricades before the crowd got there, of their behavior as literally refusing to secure the building. And the National Guard certainly not only should have been called out, it was offered 3 times.
Exactly.
And Muriel Bowser is happy to use the National Guard to block all the highways here for any old reason. In fact, during COVID, she had members of the National Guard blocking the highways so you couldn't go look at the cherry blossoms because you might die of COVID if you look at flowers. But we can't get the National Guard to secure our nation's capital.
Well, and they knew this. They had warning. Like you said, you've got people supposedly that were embedded in all these different groups, and they had an idea what was coming about. And they just refused this. The intel was there. That's why I'm saying this was just a setup.
There were
no doubt about it.
There were 6 permitted events, large events, permitted post-Trump speech. 6 permitted events on Capitol grounds that day, which is a pretty busy day for the Capitol grounds. As a resident of DC, you get a chance to see how things usually go. 6 events on the Capitol grounds is a huge day. They knew what kind of crowds were going to be there, and yet once the crowd actually arrived, these events were unable to be manifested. The planners and promoters of these events were not allowed access. They did not have any indication of where people were allowed to go. They had already taken down the barricades. Many people arrived just to the grass being open, and then were trapped in what we call a geofence. Google created a digital line.
Yes.
And they handed over without warrant. They handed over.
So there wasn't even a fence. It was just a social media geofence that they set up?
Yes. There was no physical barrier when people arrived at the Capitol. There were, in fact, especially after the initial breaches, which in my assessment and watching of the video were predominantly conducted by what appear to be operatives.
Yes.
In fact, the window I watched my friend Dominic Pizzola get accused of breaking, he didn't break it in the first place. There were 3 other individuals who broke that window before he even touched the panel of the window that was already shattered and pulled it down. And I watched FBI agent Miller sit on the stand. She was asked by the defense attorney, do you see this guy breaking the window with this 2x4? Do you know who he is? Did you investigate him? No, have no idea. Do you see this other guy pounding and smashing this window here? Do you know who he is? No, didn't investigate him. What about this guy trying to break into this window over here? Did you know who he is? No, didn't investigate him. Well, what about that guy pulling that already broken? Yes, that's Dominic Pizzola. He's a Proud Boy.
So they knew him.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The fix was definitely in. Has there been any analysis, Suzzanne, of all of these people that have been arrested? I know that you're talking the whole spectrum, because as we saw this live, you saw people walking through the Capitol building. It was almost like they were on a tour, a self-guided tour. It was all very casual. There was no threat. You had Capitol Police, greeting them and, trying to corral them out of some sensitive areas. But, by and large, there wasn't a whole lot of conflict inside the Capitol building, other than the gunshot, which to this day is beyond me. Why a Capitol police officer, would fire a gun at an unarmed individual and then be treated as some sort of hero.
Yeah, Ashley Babbitt, who died that day as a victim of murder by Officer Michael Byrd, who shot her basically in cold blood. Because if any of us have seen the footage of that moment, which, by the way, is brought to us by known Antifa John Sullivan, who saw very little blowback because of his involvement in January 6th. And he had coordinated maps. He had coordinated tactical gear that people were supposed to wear. He had told people to bring weapons. As a radical leftist, he donned a fake MAGA hat so that he could blend in, and was paid $60,000 by the mainstream media for his footage. If you've seen his footage, you see that there are 2 officers right there within reach of Ashley Babbitt. So even if what we are to believe that she's trying to break into the window, which is not actually my understanding from people who have shared their real life stories. In fact, she was trying to stop other people from breaking that window. There was no reason for her to be shot. She can be easily contained by the officers there. And yet Michael Byrd, in cold blood, shot her and killed her that day.
She's basically stuck in the window. Where was she going to go?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. No, I mean, and the question I have, Suzzanne, here is that of all these people that have been arrested, again, the full spectrum, some hardly did anything. Some, like you said, violated a geofence that was set up by Google, by the internet, that wasn't even obvious to people that they were violating any kind of barrier whatsoever. And so, how can they be liable for that? But yet, in DC terms, they set the rules and you can be liable. But I'd be curious to know, of all the people that have been arrested, what kind of offenses are we talking about in terms of the level of seriousness? I'm sure there's probably some people there that, did do some damage and they're probably guilty as charged. But others, I mean, I saw so many other people just, they were invited in by the Capitol Police. How do they're invited in, they don't know any better. And it's basically, like I said, from day one, it's been a trap.
Well, yeah, and the DC code for dispersing crowds requires that you make 3 announcements. You have to make sure that the crowd can hear those announcements. None of those protocols were followed. And in fact, we tell a joke all the time now about the water bottles of insurrection, but it's actually not a joke. Charles Donahoe is one of the Proud Boys. He did take a plea deal with the government, and he was charged with throwing a water bottle at police. However, there's no video of that water bottle hitting a police officer, hitting anybody. We don't even know where it landed. And so, but this was the act of violence. And now what's even worse, because they are charged with conspiracy, all 5 of the Proud Boys are convicted of that crime that Charles Donahoe pled guilty to, of throwing a water bottle which they have used to add a terrorism enhancement.
You
And
got to
this
be
is
kidding
why
me.
we see these egregious sentences. They
Right.
are literally called terrorists because somebody threw a water bottle and we don't even know what it hit.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too that people need to keep in context here was Epic Times did a great job, and they interviewed a use of use of force expert, and talked about how they were firing off these canisters not at the feet of the people that were there, but they were, throwing it into their chest and their heads. And so what they did was they aggravated the crowd all the more, which is, just a basic understanding and a training that all the Capitol Police would have gone through in knowing how to break up a crowd. You don't break up a crowd by firing at their heads or their chests. We know that there were a couple of people that experienced heart attacks. I think two men died of heart attacks there, and one I know of for sure got hit with a canister, and they think that may have contributed, to his heart attack. So the protocol on how they executed the crowd control was totally violated, but yet, Congress wanted to come together and, give them all honor and glory, and no look-see, no investigation as to how this whole manner of crowd control was executed.
Well, we spent all of 2020 watching the country burn down because
Exactly.
Officer Derek Chauvin had a knee in the wrong place. What I saw, and it was one of the hardest days to sit in court and watch the video over and over. What I saw happened on January 6th was that the U.S. Capitol Police and Metropolitan Police members, not all of them, but certainly members of each of these organizations, used unauthorized, unlawful, deadly force on American citizens who were peacefully protesting that day. And what was really frustrating is, they used the less than lethal rubber bullets. And it says right there on the side of the weapon, we know their training agrees with this. Do not fire at the head or face, may result in injury or death. And I watched the Capitol Police commander give the signal, open fire, and I watched the Capitol Police officer make headshot, 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 5 in a row, hitting people in the head and face every single time. That's not a mistake. That's not an inappropriate use of protocol. That is an attempt to murder American people who were peacefully protesting, and there's no other way to look at it.
And there's footage of this. So how come this doesn't come up somewhere at some point where this officer is indicted for unlawful, unauthorized use of force?
That is a very, very, very good question. But we have not seen any of those crimes prosecuted. In fact, right now, my dear friend David Summerall over at stophate.com, and you can go and check out his site also on Twitter. This is one of the things we're looking at. We're just starting to count the numbers of incidences of police brutality that occurred that day. Lila Morris, who beat Roseanne Boyland to death, beat her lifeless body. And in fact, the people who tried to help her and tried to save her life are sitting behind bars or are awaiting trial right now because they are accused of assaulting officers by merely trying to stand in the way of this officer who was murdering a woman.
Yeah. Well, Jake Lang, I know, was on the ground with Roseanne Boyland.
Yeah.
And
he sits in a cell to this day here at the DC Gulag. So
yeah, exactly. Unbelievable. And I just heard that his case, which was going to go up to the Supreme Court, something happened, and there's a different a different story now, and I wait to hear what's going to happen. Because we were hopeful that for him, finally, he was going to get his day in court. And he's one of those that have been in jail and, in and out of solitary confinement. I don't know what, for 36 months or something. I mean, it's just like, it's incredible.
And in egregious and torturous conditions, where the Bureau of Prisons is known to be very violent, and where they are being denied medical care, denied access to families, denied access to lawyers, denied access to the computers to be able to do their research for their cases. It's really a trifecta of tyranny. The Department of Justice, the FBI, and the BOP, the Bureau of Prisons, are working together to make it impossible for the American people to defend themselves, but we're
Right.
not actually prosecuting the people who did in fact commit crimes that day. There are people who committed crimes that day. Unfortunately, they tend to have the word Congress member in front of their name, or they're wearing a uniform.
Yeah, exactly. Well, speaking of Bureau of Prisons, my complaint has long been that you know people look at anybody in a uniform as being part of the men in blue. They are not, in most cases, these jailers are, people that could never make the police force, but yet they're identified. They wear uniforms. And, and I'll tell you, if I was a police officer, I would be going crazy and yelling and screaming from the top of the building that the men in blue are being misrepresented in these jails in the manner of which they abuse prisoners. Because when prisoners get out of jail and they see somebody in a uniform, what do they see? They don't see a law-abiding officer who's serving the community. They see, this flashes back to them of how they were abused in jail. In my humble opinion, this is my assessment on this, Suzzanne.
It's very interesting right now over at what we call the DC Gulag, the DC Detention Center here. Apparently, the J6 pod has been on COVID protocol lockdowns, but only on the night shift. So I guess you can only catch COVID if you're a J6er and if you happen to be on the night shift. But what we know that really means is that there is one correctional officer, one CO, who has decided to take it to another level. And unfortunately, that is not just for January 6th. It's not just political bias that's doing that. What we see with prison rape statistics, a huge percentage of the rapes and sexual assaults that go on in prison are not by other inmates, because we've done a lot. I know George Bush passed the Prison Rape Extermination Act, or PREA, which has done a lot to contain inmate sexual assault, but it has not done much to contain guard on inmate sexual assault, and that is still a very rampant problem.
How underreported is that, Suzzanne Monk?
Yeah, massively underreported, and yet the prison reformists who do, there's statistic and study after study after study that prove it to be true. And this is what I mean when we say we need Congress to actually have some teeth. They're having Officer Sund is testifying today in front of the House Administration Committee. We've had the head of the Bureau of Prisons, come and testify. But we need heads to roll. We need people to get pink slips. We need a full purge of these prison systems. And some of these prisons, like the DC jail here, Northern Neck Regional Jail in Virginia, they need to be torn to the ground. They are so egregiously and poorly run. And in such poor condition that they need to be shut down, because we're violating basic human rights on a daily basis. And in fact, there's an unfortunate story in the Northern Neck facility. I'm aware of an inmate who was an epileptic, who was allowed by guards to have a grand mal epileptic seizure on the floor of his cell in a pool of his own blood for an hour before anybody did anything to treat him. And we see this kind of egregious treatment and lack of care of prisoners across the Bureau of Prison system. It's absolutely horrific what we're incarcerating people in. And I know, look, I want to be tough on crime too, but I think that means that doesn't mean that we have to hand away our humanity.
Exactly. I was going to say,
treating people worse than dogs. You wouldn't treat
we cannot be inhumane, because then what happens, like I mentioned, what happens when this prisoner is, he's paid his price and he comes out in society? What is his perception, of law and justice and police? Because he sees guards that are, they're wearing uniforms and they're mistreating, they're raping prisoners, in all manner of inhumane treatment. Yeah. Boy, I'll tell you, it doesn't take a psychiatrist to figure out what kind of socialized impact that's going to have.
Yeah, you not only need to heal from the trauma that you've experienced from being in this facility, but also once you get out, we love to have this idea, well, once you've paid your time, you've done your time and you can become a member of society, but that's not true. No. You are kept from having professional licenses. It ends up being something that follows you wherever you go. We have seen, and the statistics back this up, that people who have gone on the other side of their prison term, they're financially, economically, educationally, they are stunted by the limitations we keep on people, even once they have served their sentence. So we need massive reform of the
I agree.
prisons themselves, of the guards, and of also how we are treating the inmates, both in the facility and after they have served their time, to make sure that people have an opportunity to become members of society again.
Exactly. Well, Suzzanne, you've got an effort that is raising money for all the J6ers, to help them with their commissary expenses. I was surprised to hear how much it costs. Most of us think that, this is where our taxes are supposed in part go to, is it's supposed to treat prisoners humanely, to where they have the kind of things they need, not that they're going to be driving around their jail cell in Mercedes or anything like that, but you think that the basic conveniences would be available to them, and you say that's not the case.
No, that's not the case at all. It is pretty common for it to cost $400 or $500 each month to have an inmate in the prison facility with regards to commissary and communication. And what are the things that you need to get through commissary? Well, basically everything: underwear, t-shirts, socks, underarm deodorant, toothpaste, all of the basic toiletries, as well as food supplements. Many of these facilities back here in DC were really bad about it. Serve inedible, tainted, unhealthy food. And the only way that you're actually able to survive is to supplement that with foods that you can purchase from the commissary. And if you think going to 7-Eleven in New York City is expensive, these prices are that much higher. In fact, at the Northern Neck Regional Jail, Superintendent Ted Hull has bragged about the millions of dollars he has sitting in the bank that he has earned off the commissary funds that he charges for these inmates.
He earns money off the commissary
fund? Got millions of dollars sitting in the bank. He's proud of it.
I tell you, I'm surprised, and probably down the road we'll start hearing about how these prisoners are going to be used as guinea pigs, and they're going to be eating bugs.
Yeah. Well, and we see the bugs, we see the rats, we see all of that. And then you add to that the cost of communication, and this is where the prisons are making big bank, because in order to text my friends on the little messaging app there in the facility, it's $0.25 each and every time I send, and it's $0.25 for them to read it. Wow. And it goes like that. And the phone calls, extremely expensive. So they are making huge amount of money just so that people can stay in communication with their family members. And this is why we've decided to help out in one way that I know is very needed, to help the over now 200 inmates that are there for January 6th through the J6 Commissary Fund. .org, and we have made sure that we have capped all of those administrative costs at 10%. So 90% of every dollar you donate will go directly to a commissary fund. And then we put out a quarterly report. It will literally show you which J6ers your money has gone to. So we're very proud of the work we're doing, and we're going to continue to do that until literally there are no J6ers. And frankly, I don't know that I'll stop being a prison reformist until we've rectified the egregious, inhumane.
Yeah, I think that definitely has opened our eyes to the reality of what's happening in America's prisons today, how they're treating fellow citizens. Suzzanne Monk, the Washington, D.C. based author and activist, continues with us. Suzzanne, we've got about 7 minutes left here. And just as a summary, help people understand who the Proud Boys are, the Oath Keepers, who they are, because they have been so maligned in the media that people do not understand what their mission is and what they're all about.
Yeah, Bill, it all basically started back in 2015, 2016, when we started to see law enforcement, unfortunately, not enforce the First Amendment right to peaceably assemble. As I always tell people, that's not, the Constitution isn't an instruction for we the people, it's an instruction for the government. And it's their responsibility to make sure that we the people can gather without being physically assaulted. And that stopped happening in 2016. We saw radical leftists violently assaulting people again and again. And groups like the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys really emerged out of a sense of needing to have some sort of security when we had rallies, when we had protests, when we had events. And they did a great job in doing that. The Proud Boys particularly have been accused of being a white supremacist organization, which is crazy because they're run by a Cuban.
Right,
You know,
exactly. A
but
lot of
even
Hispanics
in
there.
their
Yeah, exactly.
bylaws, their
Yeah.
bylaws themselves are specific. They accept all races, all colors, all creeds, all ethnic religions, gay or straight. This is
Mhm.
not what you would hear about the Proud Boys. Many of them are family guys. In fact, those values of family, of wife, of children, of being a strong provider for your family, those same traditional values, that's really what the Proud Boys are built on. And you see why the radical leftist government would have to demonize something like that. We can't
Exactly.
have strong men. And now what they're
You
doing
can't
is
have
locking
strong
them
men or
up.
strong families. That's for
Correct.
sure. Yeah.
Correct. And they're breaking these families and locking up our strong men, deliberately and directly weaponizing the government against them.
Well, I remember when the Oath Keepers came about. I was in Los Angeles, and what I understood the Oath Keepers, what drew them together, mostly former law enforcement officers, and they took an oath that they would not, because there was this rise within the profession, within law enforcement, that if your boss told you to shoot on an American citizen, you would do so. And the Oath Keepers, what motivated them was they took an oath saying they would not shoot
Right.
upon their fellow American citizen. Is that still valid today, Suzzanne?
Yes, and I think that's one of the reasons that we see these groups being targeted so much. We see the same thing when it comes to the Proud Boys. Dominic was served in the military. Zach Reel served in the military.
Mhm.
Joe Biggs, a two-time Purple Heart awardee. And when it comes to the Oath Keepers, one that's close to my heart, Jessica Watkins, who is a former Army medic.
Mhm.
She actually in 2004 transitioned. She's a trans woman. The Bureau of Prisons had put her in a male facility. And it was only through great activism that we were able to get that corrected. So uh, there's no respect for the military. There's no respect even for their own values and their own rule of law and the laws that even the left have themselves put in place. If you're a patriot, if you believe in the Constitution, if you believe in freedom, if you believe in liberty and the basic values of a republic, they don't care. They don't like you, and they're going to lock you up if they can.
Well, Suzzanne, we have got to fight against this. I mean, our rights as citizens, we cannot subordinate our rights. And as you say, it is up to the government to protect our birthright. They're basically our birth certificate, which is our U.S. Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And this is why you can't be a stupid voter. You cannot be dumbed down. They want you to be dumbed down so that you'll be compliant and easily manipulated. This will be the death of America. The rise of America started with people, wising up and being smart and uniting. And that's what we need to do. We've got 2 minutes left. I'm going to let you summarize and wrap things up for us, Suzzanne.
Well, I wanted to say it's not going to stop with January 6th. I know some people would like to look the other way and say that, it's just this one incident. But just yesterday, right here in the federal courthouse, we convicted 2 70-plus-year-old women who are now facing up to 11 years for blockading an abortion clinic to prevent a doctor from committing a very, very late term and illegal abortion. They're going to come after PTA members, and they already have. They're going to come after all of us. The First Amendment, all of our amendments, our rights, our freedoms as a country are on the line. And they are, once this Department of Justice, once this government is weaponized against us, no one is safe. So you can't just look the other way. You're going to have to get engaged. You're going to have to get involved. And we, the people, are going to have to peacefully and constitutionally take this country back from these tyrants.
Exactly. Well, Donald Trump was right. He says, they're coming after me. He says, I'm standing in the gap, for you. And fortunately, Donald Trump has what it takes. I mean, what a defender for the American people that he has been. But no doubt that Donald Trump is the crown jewel. You imagine, Suzzanne, if they take out Donald Trump, then heaven help us.
Well, and that's why it's so important to get involved in the electoral process right now. Obviously, we need to be supporting Donald Trump. We need to be supporting those people down ticket that are supporting Donald Trump, and you need to get engaged, because in my personal opinion, if we do not succeed in electing Donald Trump in 2024, we will not have a country left.
Suzzanne Monk, as we wrap things up, remind everybody how they can participate with this commissary effort.
Yeah, please go to j6commissaryfund.org. It will tell you how to participate. You can do a monthly or one-time donation. And all these are going to be funds that are so needed. And I know that all of the folks there, all of the J6ers appreciate so much. So if you can contribute, we appreciate that. And if not, just go and share the site so that those who can contribute can.
Exactly. Suzzanne Monk, the Washington, D.C. based author and activist. Suzzanne, look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Bill.
Suzzanne Monk, our thanks to her for being with us today. For more information and to be a part of this mighty movement to return to God and to save our country, go to BillMartinezShow.com. May God bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you. May he be gracious unto you and give you peace. Go and be blessed. Thank you for being with us. Take care.